All right, so just a little bit about Kevin. He was raised to appreciate nature while exploring the woodlands of Pennsylvania. I know some of you guys are from Pennsylvania. As a child, at age of 6, during a family trip through the American West, he became fascinated with photography, as well as seeing the new and different birds throughout North America. He's instilled with a love for travel and seeking new, exciting destinations. He felt a desire to share his experiences with others, and in 1993 created Wildside. So Wildside is a birding, touring, adventure, and photography uh, touring guide. I mean, touring, what do you call it?
Company?
Yeah, touring company. And I know some of you guys have been on it. I've been with them. They're awesome. But anyway, Kevin is an expert. I'm going to call him an expert in the Galapagos. He's had his publications and articles featured in Nature Photography, Audubon, Birding and Living Bird magazines, history books, and he has a new project along with co-author John Krichner called Galapagos, A Natural History, which is a great thing to get if you're going to go to the Galapagos. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin Loughlin. I'm very happy to have him speaking to us. Okay, Kevin.
All right, I guess I'm on screen. Um, Thank you so much for having me. It's unusual to do an early morning one, um, but it's definitely great. You forced me out of bed early today on a chilly morning in Pennsylvania. Our high today is only going to be 45 degrees, so I'd rather be in the Galapagos. But I don't want to keep you too long because I heard somebody mention you're going to go birding in a bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for the introduction. And if, I'm just going to share my screen here. And whoops. All right. Can you all see that sunset there?
Yeah.
Okay. So a little bit about me, along with that introduction. As mentioned, I started Wildside in 1993 after a vacation to Belize, my first trip outside the country after I'd already visited all the lower 48 states and most of Canada by the time I was 10. Um, so I blame my parents for my love of travel. And um, I've now led, after so many years of wanting to go to the Galapagos after seeing a uh, program on, whether it was a Disney special or something when I was about 8 years old. It was just a place that I wanted to visit and finally made it there in 2001. And I love it so much, I just keep going back. So I returned in October from my 54th tour to the Galapagos. So, and as mentioned, I'm co-author of The Galapagos and Natural History with John Kreischer, who is a not only a phenomenal writer, but just an incredible person who loves to teach. And he spent 50 years as a college professor, so he definitely enjoys it. And we had so much fun doing this project, especially since we got the contract about a month before the world shut down. So that was a good time to get started on it. But today I just want to talk to you about the Galapagos and how amazing it actually is. There's so much different wildlife there. And I hear so often, birders saying, there's not enough birds for the dollar. It's like, but that's not the point. You've got the iconic blue-footed booby, which is not an endemic species. It's found other places in the Pacific, but it's really become the icon of the Galapagos Islands. To the Sally Lightfoot crabs that crawl all over the rocks, to the marine iguanas, to red-billed tropic birds, and the northernmost penguins in the world. I've actually seen these penguins swimming north of the equator. So if anybody ever tells you that there's no penguins in the northern hemisphere, well, once in a while there are. And of course, Darwin's finches, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. And the giant tortoises. Everybody hears about the giant tortoises, and recently the Philadelphia Zoo uh, had some baby tortoises hatch. So they were real excited about that. So it was fun seeing that on the news. But the Galapagos is full of incredible beaches as well as the volcanic landscape. There's so much to see here. We'll always see sea lions, the beautiful waterscapes, the splashing waves, all kinds of different trees like this black mangrove and the leather leaf. Most of the flowers in the Galapagos are either white or yellow. There's a few that are different colors as well, but white and yellow are the most common. This is the Parkinsonia or Palo Verde tree, which is found elsewhere in the world, and the goat's head, which is also found elsewhere, but this is one of the common seeds. And the reason it has its name goat's head, the seed itself has two thorns on it. And in Southern California, they call it puncture weed because it will actually puncture bicycle tires. But then we have endemic plants like Darwin's cotton. So it's actually a wild cotton tree. And many, many different Scalesia trees. This is the long-haired Scalesia. And it was a lot of fun a few years back. We had a couple with us that are college professors, and they wrote the book on the Scalesias of the world. And it was fun to have them in the Galapagos, finally seeing for the first time all the different Scalesias in the Galapagos. And some of these plants are only found on one island. This is the Floriana cutleaf daisy, named for Floriana Island, because it's found nowhere else in the world except for that one island in the Galapagos. And of course, where you have flowers, you have the different pollinators. This is the large-tailed skipper. And we have so many other cool plants. The Opuntia cactus, which is a prickly pear cactus. But here in the Galapagos, they grow into trees. And in some areas, we have the Opuntia forests. And this one used to be a bit thicker, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. They're doing some research as to why the Opuntias are disappearing here. But you can see it's surrounded by the Sesuvium edmonstoni, which is uh, basically a succulent plant that goes dormant during the Garua season. And I'll talk about the seasons in just a moment as well. The trails can be uh, either sand and gravel or beach. And the hillsides can be lush or dry, depending upon the season. The higher up forests are incredibly lush because there's always clouds surrounding them. Absolutely beautiful to walk through, and so many different landscapes, as I mentioned. This you may recognize from the movie Master and Commander. It was a pivotal scene in that movie. If you've not seen the movie, definitely watch it. It's very well done. And like I mentioned, this is a pivotal scene, and there's a number of scenes that take place in the Galapagos Islands. Some of the landscaping can be quite rugged, and the trails a bit rocky, whereas during the sunsets, we can see the blowholes of Espanola Island spewing the waves high into the air. Sometimes we'll even see the Sally Lightfoot crabs getting shot way up into the air. But the big question is, how do we get there? Well, first of all, we fly into Quito, Ecuador, which is the capital up in the mountains. We'll spend a day up there. And then we'll fly from Quito to Guayaquil and then 600 miles out to Baltra Island, which was actually the airport was built there during World War II as an area to help protect the Panama Canal. And then it was turned over to Ecuador in the 50s. And so they turned it into a landing strip for tourism. The Galapagos has about 18 main islands and a whole bunch of satellite islands as well. And even those little satellite islands can offer things that are completely different from the main island that they're right next to. So the whole archipelago is volcanic. It rides along on the Nazca Plate. And the Nazca Plate, as you can see, is moving along and it's heading towards the you can see the plate here moving into, can you see my cursor there? I'm not sure.
Yes.
But it's moving under the continental plate, under South America. So it's raising up the Andes Mountains, but it's riding on the mantle of lava and it's on top of a hot spot. So the Western islands, the newer islands that are just starting to get a lot of the vegetation, they are still erupting at times. Whereas the more eastern islands are no longer active. And in fact, there's probably a number of islands that have already gone underwater. But the interesting thing here is not only the movement of the Nazca plates. You can see the Nazca Plate here where the Galapagos is riding. And then just north of the Nazca Plate is the Cocos Plate, which is moving towards Central America. And then the Pacific Plate, which is moving west. So they're separating out in the Pacific. And then along with what's happening here is we have these currents that create two seasons in the Galapagos. And so what happens is the Peruvian current and the oceanic current along South America, they form the Humboldt current, which comes up from Antarctica. So that is a cold water current that comes all the way up along the South American coast. And that's why we find Humboldt penguins in Peru. But this cold water current comes up and meets the warm water currents of the Panamic flow, which is the El Nino current, which some years can be very strong and have much warmer water around the islands. But even seasonally, you'll get warmer water because the Cromwell upwelling and the Humboldt currents change direction and they actually curve before they meet the islands. So the cold water doesn't quite reach the islands. And that's during the months of, about late November all the way up into early May. And during that time is when, yes, the Pacific is a little bit calmer, a little bit warmer around the islands. However, it's also the rainy season. So because of the warmer water, that's when the rains come, which then also brings the mosquitoes, and the locals call it the mosquito season. So November up into May, or the end of November, I should say, up into early May, um, is the rainy season and the mosquito season, and unfortunately can get very, very hot. So I personally never go during that time unless I have a private group that says they want to go then. Um, but I go during what's called the Garua season. And that's the season when the cold water currents directly hit the islands and the Cromwell upwelling is at its strongest coming in from the west. And that brings in the colder water. And what happens is that brings all the nutrients surrounding the islands. So that is the best time to be there because that's when all the seabirds are there and they're doing their nesting. So the waved albatrosses start arriving in May and do their nesting on Espanola Island. So these cold water currents are bringing all the small nutrients in that all the little stuff eats, that all the bigger stuff eats. And the squid migration is happening during that time. And the squid migration goes right up through the middle of the islands. And the squid are what the waved albatross and the Galapagos petrel and the swallowtail gulls all feed their chicks. So during the months of June, July, August, September, and October are my favorite months to be there because that's when there's the most activity of the seabirds around the islands. After that, the waved albatrosses go out to sea and just disappear, and you may not see them at all the rest of the year. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of these islands are still fairly new. You can see the volcanic islands here with all these little spatter cones or parasitic cones, as they're called, which is where the gases have escaped from the side of the volcano. And some of these areas still have some lava flows. This is from a lava flow that's only 130 years old. And this is on one of the central islands. So even though that's one of the older islands, it still had an eruption just 130 years ago, creating this incredible lava field, which again was used in the movie Master and Commander. And you can see Pinnacle Rock in the background that we saw just a little bit earlier from above. And most of this lava is the Po'oi lava, the ropey lava. So the lava is named using Hawaiian words, since a lot of the original research on eruptions and the lava flows were done in Hawaii. So you have the Po'oi lava, and then you have the volcanic tuff, which is from those spatter cones, which is called A'a lava because it hurts to walk on. So when you have this type of lava, you can also have these lava tubes, some of them being small, where the top kind of cooled before the bottom, the underneath did. So it created a tunnel flow of lava. And some of those can be pretty large where you can actually walk through them. But this ropey lava, the Po'oi lava, can give you some incredible shapes. And what's really cool, this is on that 130-year-old lava flow. And this plant is only found in the Galapagos, and it's one of the pioneer plants on the lava flows. It's called Majugo. And you can see it's just a very fine plant, usually growing about, 5 to 10 inches around. And it can just grab onto the smallest little bit of wear and tear on the lava and start to grow. And then that's what starts breaking down the lava a little bit more. And as it dies off, it creates more soil so that other plants can start, like this little lava cactus just starting to grow. And you do find some life. It seems so barren, but then we'll start seeing these large painted locusts. And that is their full name, large painted locust. And They grow about 4 inches long, maybe 4.5 inches. And then you have the small painted locust, which is not as colorful, and they only grow to about 2.5 inches. But wherever you have bugs, obviously, you've got things that eat them, like the lava lizards. We'll find some endemic species of insects here as well. This is the Galapagos blue butterfly. So a small little butterfly about, oh, an inch to an inch and a half wingspan, to the much larger Galapagos sulfur. And we have the Galapagos carpenter bee. This is the female, which is fairly large, always all black, whereas the male, much smaller, is kind of a golden brown. And we'll have some spiders. This is the zigzag spider. And one that you rarely ever see, the Galapagos centipede, which will grow to about 8 or 9 inches long. And of course, we have the Sally Lightfoot crabs, named for the whalers from the 1800s. They named it for their favorite dancer back home, Sally Lightfoot. And they are very light-footed. They can actually jump from rock to rock, and they're very, very quick. We'll also find ghost crabs on some of the beaches, digging their holes and making their little balls of sand as they filter the sand for food. We might find some semi-terrestrial hermit crabs and the endemic Galapagos hermit crab with the much darker legs. On some beaches, we'll be walking along and it appears like the sand is moving because of these tiny, tiny little fiddler crabs. This one was one of the largest ones we found on this beach. It could easily fit on my thumbnail. So many of the other ones are about the size of a deer tick. So nice, really, really tiny. And you have to look real close to see them. And in some of the tide pools, which can be a lot of fun to explore, we'll see Galapagos blennies, this little fish that grows to about 4 or 5 inches, or possibly sometimes we get these hieroglyphic hawkfish and other larger fish that get stuck in the tide pools and have to wait for the tide to come back in before they can go into deeper water. So this hawkfish was actually about 2 feet long. We'll see bullseye pufferfish, which from above look like these concentric rings, looking like a target, hence the name. And we'll often see rays and sharks in the shallower waters. These are the golden cownose rays. But to really see a lot of the sea life, you do need to go snorkeling. And the snorkeling here can be fantastic. We'll find blue sea stars clinging to the rocks and Panamic cushion stars, and even the chocolate chip star, my favorite. Lots of fish. This huge school of Creole fish with a few sergeant majors mixed in there, and blue and gold snappers moving in large schools. We'll see many different types of parrotfish, like this bicolored parrotfish, and even pufferfish. This is a Pacific boxfish, named because of the very angular appearance of its body shape, versus the guinea fowl pufferfish, um, which is more shaped like a football, even though it has the same color pattern on it. And what's really cool is the guinea fowl puffer comes in a bright yellow morph as well. And researchers aren't really sure whether this is actually a morph or a phase. So they're still doing some research on that, and there's so much we still don't know about the creatures under the sea. If you look real close at this rock, you may notice an eyeball over to the left, which is the eyeball of the stone scorpion fish with its huge fins, and it just blends in, looking like something growing on the rocks. We might find some moray eels like this jeweled moray or the fine spotted or speckled moray. And spotted eagle rays, typically seen, fairly deep in the water, can often be found in the shallow water as well. And Galapagos sharks are one of about four species that we see here. The Galapagos shark, the white-tipped reef shark, the black-tipped shark, and the scalloped hammerhead shark. But we also get to snorkel with sea turtles, the Pacific green turtle to be specific. And in some areas, we can be surrounded by up to a dozen turtles at a time, which is really amazing to have that opportunity. But as I mentioned, you don't always have to snorkel to see the fish. Sometimes they jump right out of the water like this yellowfin tuna during a feeding frenzy. We'll see lots of, well, I shouldn't say lots. We have the opportunity to see some cetaceans here, like bottlenose dolphins, sometimes quite close to our boat, moving along as we motor to a different island. We might see some humpback whales, but I've also seen Breida's whale and orca and minke whale and fin whale and pilot whale and false killer whale. So there's quite a bit uh, of different species that can be found here. And that's why it was such a popular place for whaling in the 1800s. Now, along with the cetaceans, which are mammals, we'll find other sea mammals that we may see either underwater while we're snorkeling, and they'll come up and blow bubbles in your face, sometimes tug on your fins. They can be very playful. They're the Galapagos sea lions, related to the California sea lion, but they are um, really not aggressive at all. Um, they are quite docile. Like I said, they can be very playful, coming up and tugging on your swim fins while you're snorkeling or blowing bubbles in your face. But there's another species of sea lion here that the whalers actually called a seal, and that's the Galapagos fur seal, or fur sea lion, as it's more appropriately called. They called it a fur seal, and it's very different. And once the whales were more difficult to uh, to catch because they were really hunted to near extinction, the whalers started hunting the fur sea lions for their fur. It's very thick, warm fur. And you can see the difference in the face. It's a very smushed face versus the long nose of the Galapagos sea lion. But you know it's a sea lion because it has the external ear flaps, but it also has the movable hip so it can bring its fins all the way up into its belly, and it can curve its neck around. If you think about the difference, a seal is more like a sausage. It really just cannot move freely on on land. And that's why they're typically, when the seal comes out of the water, it's typically still close to the water on the beach. These Galapagos fur sea lions can actually climb up on the cliffs, and it's really amazing to see places that they end up sleeping are places that we would struggle to climb to. Now, the fur sea lions and the Galapagos sea lions, they will come ashore, but the only real uh, native and endemic land mammal is the Galapagos rice rat. It's a vegetarian rat, so it's not like the rats that were introduced to the Galapagos, the ship rats and the Norway rats that are found on some of the islands with population. These little guys, they found their way to the islands probably on floating mats of vegetation. But they feed on the cactus pads and on the seeds and such found on just two islands, Santa Fe Island and Santiago Island. And then, of course, we have the reptiles, the largest of them being the giant tortoise. Now, these guys, this particular subspecies of the giant tortoise found on Santa Cruz Island can grow to be over 500 pounds. So these are the largest of the giant tortoises in the Galapagos Islands. And they love being in the mucky water, often filled with lots and lots of duckweed. And they will once in a while battle over their territory. It's not much of a battle, and their territory is really just the space that their carapace takes. And so if one tortoise wants to move into that spot in the muddy water, they'll just do a little bit of hissing and neck raising until one decides, okay, that's your spot, I'll go away. But they feed on the grasses, these dome-shaped tortoises, and on the different islands, they have different shaped carapace. So this is the dome shape. You can see how low over the head it is because the food on this island is mostly on the ground. You can see a smooth-billed Annie on the back of this guy. The Annies were unfortunately introduced by the farmers to kind of mitigate the insects, which there were other birds doing that, but they didn't realize it. But these tortoises, as I mentioned, this is a huge male that easily weighs 500 pounds. So when they're walking down the trail, you just step aside and let them walk on by. On other islands, you can see the different shape of the shell, where the front will come up much higher. This one is actually an intermediate versus the saddleback shell, which can come up even higher because their food was much higher to reach, like the prickly pear cactus that we saw earlier. And you can see here, there's not a lot of vegetation on the ground, so they had to be able to reach up higher. So the carapace became shaped differently over time. But yet, when Darwin arrived here, even though he was told by the mayor of the Galapagos Islands at that time in 1835 when he visited, the mayor told him that he could tell which island a tortoise came from by the shape of its shell. Darwin still ignored that and never, I mean, he enjoyed the tortoises, but he didn't really think about that in terms of adaptation. But the whalers, unfortunately, thought about these guys as food. And over a century plus of whaling west of the Galapagos Islands, and many people don't realize that the Galapagos and that Cromwell upwelling that I mentioned were some of the best whaling waters in the world. And in fact, Melville visited the Galapagos Islands after he spoke with one of the last remaining survivors of the whaling ship, the Essex, that was destroyed by a giant sperm whale. And he visited the islands while writing the book Moby Dick based on that whaling ship that was destroyed and the survivors that made it to the Galapagos Islands. So there's other reptiles that we can find throughout the Galapagos, including different species of snakes. This one is specific to Espanola Island, the Espanola racer. Whereas this one is the central Galapagos racer, which is found on several islands of the central part of the archipelago. And it can come in either a speckled variety or a striped variety, similar to the Espanola racer. And of course, lots and lots of lava lizards. We saw one earlier on the lava fields. This is a female on Espanola Island, where the whole head is red. On some other islands, just the throat is red, and on other ones, the throat is white, like on San Cristobal Island. And the male on most of the islands has a black throat and are typically much larger than the females. And on Espanola Island, they can grow to be about 10 inches, whereas on some of the other islands, they barely grow more than 4 inches. And then we have the iguanas. So, two species of iguana. We have the land iguana, which on most islands, and there's several different species, but on most islands that you get to see the typical land iguana, kind of orangey yellow underneath with a blackish back. On Santa Fe Island, you have a different species, the Santa Fe land iguana, and this one is much more pale, doesn't have that dark back. And then we have the marine iguanas. And on islands like Genovesa, they're very small. They might get to about 18, 20 inches or so. Whereas on other islands, they can grow more than 3 feet long and can be different colors. You can see this one has reddish scales and also a little bit of green on it. And that can vary quite a bit. You can see the green right on the nose. And they call them marine iguanas because they feed in the ocean. So this cold water, they swim out into the ocean and feed on the algae on the rocks out in deeper water. And so they wait for the higher tides to come in and uh, or actually the lower tides, so they don't have to swim as far. And then when the high tide comes up, that's when they start swimming back to shore so that they can warm up after being in the cold water for about a half hour or 45 minutes or so. And as they're sitting on the rocks, often in large groups, they have to get rid of the salt that they took in, so they snort out the salt. And then once in a while, we'll find this unusual guy. You can see the land iguana in the foreground, that very orangey yellow belly and the dark back. And the one in the background is actually a hybrid of the land iguana and the marine iguanas. And it stays on land. It does not feed in the water. It feeds on the cactus pads, but you can see it's very different from both of the iguanas. Has more of a tiger striping, and that can vary from uh, different individuals. Some it's much more contrasty. This one, much less contrast between it. But all of the hybrids have that white slash that you see along the neck. So it's kind of interesting to see that. You don't see very many. At one point, I was talking to some researchers, and there were at the peak 13 known um, hybrids that they could find on any of the islands, most of them being on South Plaza Island, just a tiny little island off the coast of Santa Cruz Island. So you can see the typical marine iguana is all black, whereas the land iguana, as I mentioned, is typically that orangey with a black back. And then there's the hybrid, very different in appearance between the two. Now, when it comes to the birds, many of you may have seen this bird in Florida. This is the white-cheeked pintail, or also known as the Bahama duck, and they are native to the Galapagos Islands. They breed there. So they're a beautiful duck, wonderful to find. And we'll find lots of other birds, especially in migration, during the later months of the Garua season, typically starting in late August uh, up through the winter months. We'll see semi-palmated plovers and ruddy turnstones and wandering tattlers maybe some black-necked stilts, and the oyster catchers, the American oyster catcher, which is interesting since along the West Coast, in the US and all the way up along the Alaskan and Canadian coast, we have the black oyster catcher, and on the southern Pacific coast of South America, we have the blackish oyster catcher. But yet, the American oyster catcher comes to the Galapagos. And as you can see, they also breed there. And whimbrels can come in big numbers. On one beach during migration, I counted 68 whimbrels on one small beach. But we might recognize this guy, the yellow-crowned night heron. This is a juvenile. And obviously, they breed on these islands as well, as we'll see many different plumage variations of the yellow-crowned night herons. And we also get the great blue herons. So lots of birds that we may recognize, though we don't often get to see them sitting on the lava rocks and feeding on the black-tipped cardinalfish. Then we'll have species that look similar to what we have in the States. This is in the same genus as the green heron. This is the lava heron eating a blenny, which does not look very happy at the moment. And then we'll also see the Caribbean or American flamingo. These guys are doing their courtship dance, so they nest here in the Galapagos as well. But we may also find Chilean flamingo. So you can see the difference with the uh, American flamingo on the left. Not only is it a little darker pink, though the juvenile American flamingo can be very pale as well, but the bill has a little more of a pattern to it versus the Chilean, which just looks like it was dipped in tar. And then the legs you can see on the American flamingo are all pink with those bright pink knees, whereas the Chilean flamingo does have the bright pink knees, but then the legs are sort of a yellowish gray in color. So we don't get to see them on every trip, but they do show up once in a while during that season that we prefer to go, the Guruas season, which is when the water is colder, and the currents, for some reason, tend to bring these guys over. But again, the colder water season, which is called the Garua season, which is the local name for mist. And during this season, the mornings, because of the colder water bringing in all those nutrients, the mist will appear late evening and then start to dissipate late morning. And so we'll go ashore right after sunrise, which is the earliest we're allowed on the uninhabited islands. And we may see the blue-footed boobies doing their dance at this time of year. So the Garua season, which again is about mid-May up into mid-November, is the best time to be there to see the blue-footed boobies doing their courtship dance. The boobies are there all the time, but this is when you get to see them dance and have their chicks and raise their young during that Garua season when they're able to feed the chicks more. And we'll get to see them diving in, feeding on fish and the squid, and often in large groups. This one looks like it's going to hurt, but we'll see them also diving even in shallow water. If you look real close towards the right of this image, you can just see the eyeball of the blue-footed booby diving in about 6 inches of water. But no matter what, they're fun to watch. Everybody wants to see the blue-footed booby. So even though they're not an endemic, they are native, but they are found elsewhere in the world along the Pacific shorelines of northern South America and all the way up to Baja, California. And you can see the blue on the feet can vary from that bright cyan of the booby on the left to more violet blue of the one on the right. Also, if you look real close, look at the eyeballs of these boobies. The one on the left, and this has nothing to do with the color of the feet, that has to do with what they're eating. But if you look at the eyeballs, the one on the left, you can see has a smaller iris than the one on the right. Well, the iris itself, or the pupil, I'm sorry, the pupil itself is not actually larger on the one on the right. It's that the edge is darker, making the pupil look larger. And that is the female versus the male. But the color of the feet varies with the food, not with it being male or female. It's the eyes that are different. And then we have the Nazca booby, which was split from the mast booby. Um, and the Nazca booby has a much darker bill than the mast booby, much more orange versus the paler yellow of the mast booby. And this one is named for the Nazca Plate on which the Galapagos ride. So it is a Galapagos endemic species now. And we'll find them nesting there. They nest on the ground like the blue-footed boobies do. And their courtship is more of a preening courtship. And when they raise their young, you can see the young Nazca booby has a very brownish head. Some people think that they are a brown booby, but they don't have that very defined uh, brown versus white marking. It's very faded in the front. But you can see anytime the birds are feeding their young, in this case, a squid, the frigate birds will come in and try to steal it. And then we have the red-footed boobies. And again, you may see these in the Caribbean. And the red-footed boobies are the only booby in the Galapagos that can perch in trees. So they actually nest in these mangroves. So their feet are able, as you can see, to grasp the branches. So the blue-footed boobies and the Nazca boobies are unable to do that, so they nest on the ground. You may see them perched on a very large branch once in a while, but they can't grip the smaller branches, especially of the mangroves. And in the Caribbean, we typically see the white morph of the blue-footed or the red-footed boobies, and once in a while the brown morph. Whereas in the Galapagos, though we do see both morphs, instead of the white being the dominant, it's the brown that's dominant, and we only see a few of the white morphs. So it is fun to see that difference and why that gene, the white gene, is so much more recessive in the Galapagos is unknown. So the brown is going to be the common one. This is a female actually on the nest. And of course, pelicans. We may see some Peruvian pelicans once in a while, but mainly the typical brown pelican. But it's fun catching them while we're photographing, catching them diving into the water, along with the blue-footed boobies and such. And then we'll see frigate birds here as well. And many of you see frigate birds fairly often, I know. This is the magnificent frigate bird, which has the purplish mantle. The male has that purplish mantle on on its back, whereas we also find the great frigate birds. And if you'll notice, the great frigate bird is much more greenish on its mantle. And I love this. This was truly an accidental image. I was just testing my exposure to make sure the exposure was right for the birds in flight. And later on, when I downloaded all my images onto my computer, I noticed this one had the seahorse in its bill. Here we can find also a very unusual bird, one that Darwin never got to see. It was on an island he didn't visit. Darwin only visited 4 of the Galapagos Islands, and he did not get to the far western islands of Fernandina and Isabella, where we can find the flightless cormorant. You see that beautiful azure blue eye, but those wings that obviously will not allow it to fly. But underwater, they fly very, very quickly through the water. It's incredible to watch them swim. And the other flightless bird that we'll find here are the Galapagos penguins, which I mentioned earlier, are the northernmost penguins in the world. They're a very small penguin, but they can sometimes be found north of Isabella Island. And Isabella, the top of Isabella Island actually crosses the equator. So I have seen them north of the equator. Always fun to watch, whether they're very cumbersome waddling on rocky lava, or this one, you can see the female way up top there by that opening. That was her nesting area, and the 2 youngsters tumbling down the rocks to get to the water for the first time. And what's really special is quite often we'll get to snorkel with them. And this one, if you look real close, caught a little fish right in front of my face. Now we'll see several species of gulls here. We might see the lava gull, only found on a few of the islands. So we definitely watch out for them. Very gray with a dark head. Their closest relative is the laughing gull, which we are used to seeing. And if we hear a laughing gull while we're in the Galapagos, it's most likely the lava gull. And we also get the beautiful swallow-tailed gull. You can see the kind of swallow-tailed shape of that tail, and beautiful grayish head with that red eye ring. And you'll notice that red eye ring, when it's wide open, that eye is very dark. They're nocturnal feeders. But when the eye is closed, you still see that spectral highlight, it's called, the highlight reflection in the eye. So even though this one has its eyelid closed and it looks like a red eyebrow now, it still has that spectral highlight to make frigate birds think that the eye is closed so that it doesn't come after its chicks. So that's the only predator of these birds, is the frigate birds going after the chicks. And we have a number of species of storm petrels. And again, these guys are really tough to photograph. They're so fast. This is the wedge-rumped storm petrel, that very triangular white patch on its rump, flying over its nesting area, versus the uh, Elliott's storm petrel with just that white band on the rump. And then there's also the band-rumped storm petrel, which has a white band. But the difference is the band-rumped storm petrel has much shorter legs because they feed differently. So the Elliott storm petrel actually feeds by using the surface tension of the water. And so it has those long legs and kind of does a ballet on the surface of the water to catch things, little microscopic things on the surface of the water. And then we have the larger seabirds, like the I'm sorry, not the wandering, the waved albatross, named for kind of the wavy pattern on its breast. The waved albatross is one of the smallest of the albatross family. It's only has an 8-foot wingspan. But what's really interesting is they come here during that Garua season, during that cold water season, again, from mid-May up into mid-November to nest in the Galapagos Islands. And other than a few pair that nest on a little tiny island off the coast of Ecuador, the island of Espanola in the Galapagos is considered the only true breeding area of the waved albatross. And this one island is the furthest southeast island in the Galapagos. And we'll find them, they come in, they'll do their courtship dance, which is a lot of fun to watch. They do this sword play with their bills. Um, and then they will raise one chick, and that chick will take about 60 days to incubate, and then they do actually grow fairly quickly. And by the end of that growth season, they're ready to take off and head out to sea. And they don't get their full adult plumage for 4 years. So they stay out to sea for 4 years before coming back specifically to Espanola Island to nest. So this particular island has just the perfect conditions for these birds, and they will nest uh, either amongst these uh, uh, small trees, and during the Garua season, they go dormant, um, or they'll nest out on the rocky areas along with the Galapagos doves. But the waved albatross, they like this island because on one side, it's a steep cliff that the southern winds flowing along that cold water current, the winds come north and they hit that cliff and cause an updraft that allows the albatross to walk up to the cliff, lift open its wings, and just drift out over the sea without having to work very hard. Now, as we go up into the highlands, again, we may see some familiar birds on the islands, like the common gallinules or even purple gallinules. This one eating the endemic Galapagos tomato, though. We might see some paint-billed crakes, and if we're lucky, we may see the Galapagos crake. Once in a while, we'll see the dark-billed cuckoo, which is not an endemic. It's found on the mainland mainly, but they are found on a couple different islands in the Galapagos as well. However, the Galapagos flycatcher, the smallest of the Myarchus family, it's Myarchus magnorostris, or big-nosed flycatcher, was once called the large-billed flycatcher. They realized is only found on the Galapagos Islands, this one eating a large painted locust that we saw earlier. And then we have the vermilion flycatcher. This is the female vermilion flycatcher, now also known as the brujo flycatcher. But you can see the female on the Galapagos is not that salmony pink color that we know of from the mainland. It's more yellowish underneath, much more similar to the Galapagos flycatcher. The male, though, is still very red like the vermilion, and it was split from the vermilion just a few years ago. But this particular subspecies, the flycatcher, the brujo flycatcher, which is also found on the mainland in South America, this is the Galapagos subspecies. It is disappearing very, very quickly. Unfortunately, there was an introduced fruit fly that carries a virus that is only affecting these brujo flycatchers. So this one I photographed in 2017 on the island of Rabida. And since then, I have not seen any. Now they are still found, but very, very few are still being seen on just a couple of the Western islands. However, the mangrove warbler split from the yellow warbler. This is the Galapagos mangrove warbler. Uh, Obviously, much like the yellow warbler, that very streaky breast, but that kind of reddish, rusty crown on the head. So that separates it from the yellow warbler, along with the fact that it doesn't migrate, it sings differently and nests differently. And unlike our yellow warbler that prefers one habitat to nest in, the Galapagos mangrove warbler will be in every single habitat from the rocky lava to the high forests. And this one is a female. Many would say it's a juvenile, and it was thought for many, many years that this was a juvenile because of the gray feathers around its neck. This is actually a gray morph of the female mangrove, Galapagos mangrove warbler. This one is a much more typical female with the darker head and a little more yellow on the throat, but you can see found on the beach. So we will find them everywhere and every day in the Galapagos, from the shoreline along the beaches all the way up into the much more lush highlands. But these males can be absolutely spectacular to see. They're the only bright yellow bird in the Galapagos. One of the main predators in the Galapagos, and the few predators, and of the few raptors, is the Galapagos hawk. Now, over the years, I have seen osprey and peregrine falcon, actually both in the same year, and only one year. It was during an El Nino year. We saw the osprey and the peregrine falcons, and my local naturalist that I work with had only seen either species once before in all the 18 years that he had been guiding. So they showed up in the El Nino year, extremely rare to see. But the Galapagos hawk is found on several of the islands, and they are carrion eaters as well as predators. They'll feed on young iguanas, on the Galapagos snakes, on the lava lizards, and on the birds as well. And they are actually a closest relative would be the Swainson's hawk, which, if you think about it, this one feeding a chick with a Espanola mockingbird waiting for some scraps. But this juvenile preening, they're not afraid of humans at all. But if you look at this juvenile in flight, you can see the darkish feathers coming in, similar to the Swainson's hawk. And if you think about it, the Swainson hawk is a Western migrant that goes all the way down to Argentina. And so therefore, they are the most likely ones to have been blown out to the Galapagos Islands. So that would be the closest relative of the Galapagos hawk. We can also find barn owls here, another predatory raptor, and short-eared owls. But look at the difference of these short-eared owls, how much darker they are than the ones we find in North America or elsewhere in the world. Very, very cinnamon and milk chocolate in color. And the reason is, if you look at all of these dark little birds, they're the wedge-rumped storm petrels, along with this red-billed tropic bird flying around. But all of these birds nest in the little crags in all of the lava rocks on a couple of the islands. And so you'll see on these islands, the lava rocks are the same color as the short-eared owls. They blend in so well. And the reason being is they go after the wedge-rumped storm petrels. So you can see three storm petrels if you look close One obviously in flight up in the top of the frame there, another one right behind the owl in flight, and then another one blending in on the ground over here. You can just see some of the white over there and the tail sticking out. But these guys will actually catch these storm petrels as they're coming in and out of their burrows. So they don't really have to work that hard to catch them. And they will eat just the body, leaving the wings behind. So as we're walking along the trail, if you find a pair of wings, you know that there's a short-eared owl in the area. But they are an absolutely beautiful color variation of the short-eared owl. It's the Galapagos subspecies, probably soon to be split because they are so different, not only in their coloration, but in their feeding habits versus elsewhere in the world. So Darwin visited the Galapagos in 1835. He actually left on the voyage of the Beagle in 1831. So it took him 4 years to get to the Galapagos. And he only visited, as I mentioned, 4 islands. And on those islands, he found some things that really had his mind thinking, but it still took him over 2 decades to release his book, The Origin of Species, even though he wrote shortly after returning from the Galapagos. And many of us think about the Galapagos uh, and Darwin's finches, but the finches, like the short-eared, I'm sorry, yeah, the small ground finch and the medium ground finch, named for the different sizes of the bills, the sharp-beaked ground finch. Darwin got to see all of these on those 4 different islands, and the common cactus finch as well. But Darwin thought this was a blackbird, not a finch. And he collected a bunch of these finches. So even though the blackbird, like our red-winged blackbird, the female is streaky brown. So he just figured this was a female versus the black one, which was a male, which he wasn't wrong. That was a breeding male, but a common cactus finch with that elongated bill. Not always in the cactus, sometimes on the ground, but he never got to see the large ground finch because it's found on islands that he did not get to visit. And look at the size of that bill. And that's used for cracking those huge seeds like the goat's head seeds. He never got to see the Genovesa cactus finch, again, a bird with a very large bill, nor the Espanola cactus finch. He never got to visit the island of Espanola. And he thought that the warbler finch was actually a wren because of the way it acted. A long, kind of thin, needle-like bill, and quite often wagging its tail. But the warbler finch is still a finch, even though it looks more like a warbler, acts like a warbler, hence the name warbler finch. But it is related to the finches. And now that's been split into two. The gray warbler finch, you can see here, very grayish plumage, and the green warbler finch. Well, I wouldn't really call that green, so it's more of an ochre color with a little bit of greenish hint to it. But this is really interesting because this is also called the green warbler finch, um, much more yellow than green. And on some islands, uh, the green warbler finch can also be gray, and the gray warbler finch can also look green. So I'm not sure how that split ever really came to be. Um, but we'll see as more research is done. But there's been a bunch of other more recent splits, like the cactus finches on Genovesa and Espanola that I showed you earlier, they were once one species known as the large cactus finch. But those two islands are 100 miles apart, and you could see the difference in the size of the bills. So they finally split them about 5 or 6 years ago. Then we have the tree finches, three different varieties. That's the small tree finch. Again, named for the bill, not necessarily the bird's size, but small tree finch, and they can vary as well. Their heads become black during the breeding season. And then the vegetarian finch. Now, we think of finches in general as being vegetarian, feeding on mainly seeds and such. This guy also eats fruit, which the other finches will as well, but it also eats flowers and leaves. So that's how it got its name as vegetarian finch. And all these finches use the same type nest, kind of a ball nest with a side entrance. Whether it's in the cactus or in the trees, they're all very much the same. This is a woodpecker finch, still built with the same style nest. And the woodpecker finch is really cool. It's got that thicker bill, much more elongated than the tree finches. But it's called a woodpecker finch not because it makes holes in the wood, but because it scrapes the bark off and finds larvae either in under the bark or in little holes in the rotted tree branches. And you'll notice this one has a dark bill. So in breeding, they get a black bill. And this one's holding a stick. So these guys actually use tools. If they can't reach the larvae with their bill in a hole in the rotten branch there, they'll use a tool. They'll break off a stick, and I've actually seen them shape the end of the stick into a curve like a shepherd's hook so that they can reach in and pull out insect larvae. But you know what? We call them the Darwin's finches. And Darwin, when he collected them, he just put them all in one bag, again, thinking, some are finches, some are blackbirds, some are wrens. And he just put them all in one bag. He never labeled the islands that he got them from. He never really labeled what he thought they were. He just dropped them off to the ornithologist at the Natural History Museum in London at that time. And it was the ornithologist there that realized they were all finches. Darwin instead was much more interested in the mockingbirds. He had seen the mockingbirds along the coastline of South America and fell in love with the mockingbirds there. But when he got to the Galapagos, he found different species. And there's 4 different species of mockingbirds in the Galapagos and a number of different subspecies, but we'll just talk about the 4 different species. The Galapagos mockingbird is the most common, and it is known to be
Yeah,
very
Kevin,
gregarious. I'm sorry?
I'm I'm sorry, we need to wrap it up. I'm really sorry. We've
Oh,
got
I'm
the
sorry.
That's okay, but like a couple more minutes and then
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, I
apologize.
can just go through these real quick
Okay.
because this is kind of exciting seeing this. This is, the Galapagos mockingbirds versus this mockingbird is on a different island, San Cristobal Island, much finer bill and different facial markings. And then this one, there's only 24 pair left, and it's no longer found on the island of Floriana. But it's called the Floriana mockingbird. That was its original home. And they are extremely, extremely endangered. So we get to see them on one of the little satellite islands off of Floriana. But the Espanola mockingbird, one of the islands that Darwin never visited, Darwin never got to see this one. And this, with its much larger bill and very gregarious behavior. They love just following us around, and obviously they enjoy photography. But they will just come right up to us and look in our lenses, and they're just a lot of fun. But Darwin never got to see them. And yet it was the mockingbirds that really made him look at the adaptations that they had, why they were different, much more so than the finches. So definitely a ton of fun. And we'll wrap it up here with just a little bit about tourism in the Galapagos. And I hear quite a bit of folks say we should stop going to the Galapagos. We need to protect it. We shouldn't be bothering the wildlife there, and all of these things that we know now, especially, and I've always said this, we need tourism in the Galapagos. Even though I hear it all the time, we shouldn't go there. We got to protect the wildlife. But when we don't go there, as we found out during the pandemic, when the Galapagos Islands shut down and there was no more money coming in, over 260 fishing boats from China came to the Galapagos. Now you can see they're mainly outside of that UNESCO imaginary border of the UNESCO reserve. But every night, most of these boats turned off their locators, which is their identification for the radar. And they went completely dark so that they could go inside and illegally fish inside the zone. There was no money coming in from tourism. And that allowed overfishing during the pandemic from all of these ships that came in from all around the world, but mainly from China and some from Japan. So our tourism, though we land there and we have a lot of people that visit, and there are folks that live there as well that do require our tourism dollars. But those dollars all go towards the protection, the breeding areas for the Galapagos tortoises to help us bring back the tortoises that were lost to the whalers that used them for food. And then they get released back into the wild. So these couple of little towns on these islands survive on the tourism, and in turn, they help protect all the wildlife that surrounds them. So, yes, the hand of man does happen and can sometimes kill some of the wildlife. But just think those Chinese fishing boats were taking mostly squid while they were there, and the swallowtail gulls, and these Galapagos petrels, highly endangered, and the waved albatrosses all depend on the squid. And look at the garbage that was left behind by these Chinese boats, all of these plastic bottles. And you can see the Chinese writing on these bottles, on all the labels. They just dump them overseas. And we know what plastic does to the wildlife. It can kill that wildlife because they feed on it thinking that it might be jellyfish. Introduced species that come in, like the wasps and the cottony cushion bug, even things that really are not as harmful other than the plants, such as monarch butterflies and the different introduced birds and even feral cats and goats over the years, which they are getting rid of and reducing all of that and helping bring back these forests and wildlife. But please, as we finish this up, heading back to our yacht, say goodbye to the blue-footed boobies and say farewell to the penguins as they blow bubbles in our faces. And please visit the Galapagos Islands. And I appreciate you joining me. And I apologize for going a little bit long there. But again, if you want to learn more, pick up the book or join me on a trip. And I'm doing a very special offer for you folks. If you use the coupon code VILLAGES and register for one of our trips by November 20th of this year, our June trip for next year is sold out, but we still have space on the other two trips in 2026 and 2027. $1,000 off our standard trips, or in 2027, our July 21st trip. That's going to be an extra long 18-day trip visiting all of the islands, celebrating my 60th tour in the Galapagos, and my 65th birthday will be while we're motoring along there. And that one will be $2,000 off with that coupon. So again, thank you very much. I apologize for going over the time, but I hope you enjoyed the Galapagos as much as I do.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm just going to stop the recording.